Hey heroes, and welcome to another post-apocalyptic episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help determine what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. This week's tale begins not in the Prime Marvel Universe, Reality 616, but an alternate timeline designated Earth-1191. Now, like many worlds in the multiverse, much of this reality's history is similar to that of the Marvel Universe proper, up to a certain point of significant divergence. For example, on both Earth-616 and Earth-1191, the X-Men prevented the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants from assassinating the anti-mutant politician, Senator Robert Kelly. I bring that up in particular because it denotes the Reality 1191 timeline as being distinct from the events of Reality 811, better known as the Days of Future Past timeline. Much like on Earth-616, there was also an incident on Earth-1191 in which the Scarlet Witch used her reality warping abilities to depower the vast majority of the world's mutant population, an event referred to as M-Day. For several years, no new mutants were born, and the species seemed doomed to extinction, but eventually a new mutant birth was detected, reigniting hope among their people. That kicked off a conflict between the X-Men and a group of anti-mutant zealots known as the Purifiers, who massacred numerous children trying to find and kill the newborn, but this is where Earth-1191 really diverges from the Marvel Universe proper. You see, the emergence of this red-haired mutant messiah did ultimately reignite the mutant population, but on Earth-1191, she was apparently responsible for the death of approximately 1 million humans in an event known as the 6-Minute War. Now, the details of exactly how all that went down are sketchy at best, but it seems that in the wake of this incident, an army of Sentinel robots were unleashed on a still recovering mutant population, killing most of the X-Men as well as their founder, Professor Charles Xavier. Now, after that, things seemingly progressed in a way that is reminiscent of the aforementioned Days of Future Past timeline, as the Sentinels expanded their influence and effectively dominated all of North America. Despite this, the United States government continued to function, and many genetically human citizens went about their daily lives as normal, at least at first. Most surviving mutants, meanwhile, were hunted down, rounded up, and either killed or interned in so-called mutant relocation camps. Some mutants were employed to help hunt down their own kind and were referred to as hounds, which is yet another parallel between this reality and the Days of Future Past. As a result of all of this, while some considered the baby who reignited the mutant population to be the hope of their people, others regarded her with despair as a red-headed monster, blaming her for their misfortune. As one of the few surviving X-Men, Cyclops retreated to the ruins of New Jersey's Atlantic City to hide with his daughter Ruby, who, as far as I can tell, is unique to this reality. The child of Scott Summers and Emma Frost, Ruby inherited powers similar to those of her parents, including the ability to fire force beams from her eyes, like her father, and shift her body into a superhumanly strong, crystalline form like her mother. While hiding from the Sentinels, Ruby transformed into this state permanently, completely halting her aging and allowing her to stay in her physical prime for decades. Meanwhile, her father stayed with her, keeping himself alive through the use of cybernetics. Of course, while North America was largely controlled by the Sentinels, mutants still lived in other parts of the world. Such was the case for Burnham and Katie Bishop, a married couple who lived in Alice Springs, Australia, about 50 years after M-Day. Whereas Burnham had enhanced stamina and the ability to regenerate low-grade tissue, Katie could create force fields to absorb and dispel energy. I will note that one of these two was apparently the grandchild of the Aboriginal Australian mutant Gateway, although I don't believe it's ever been confirmed which one. In either case, one day, after picking up chatter on a high-level security band, Burnham learned that their home had been targeted for a tactical nuclear strike in the ongoing Gene War. While he managed to get himself and his wife onto the last flight out of the area before it was too late, the couple had no choice but to flee to the Sentinel-controlled United States. Soon after arriving, their mutant natures were detected and the Bishops were sent to the overcrowded Sheepshead Bay internment camp in Brooklyn, New York. Furthermore, Katie was pregnant at the time, and so 7 months later she gave birth to her son, Lucas Bishop, on the floor of a mutant concentration camp without the help of a doctor. At first, he didn't appear to be breathing and had to be resuscitated, and so seemingly from the moment he was born, Lucas Bishop had to fight to survive. In the wake of all of this, Burnham and Katie often fought with each other, and so as a toddler, Lucas was primarily raised by his father, while his mother spent most of her time with other mutants in the camp. Despite this, within the next 3 years, the couple had a second child, a girl named Shard Bishop. Meanwhile, a woman who was supposedly Lucas Bishop's grandmother was interned at a different camp. However, she was able to work out a deal that allowed her to transfer to Sheepshead Bay and be with her family. Of course, it should be noted that this woman, while officially unidentified, did look strangely similar to a certain white-haired X-Man. Her potential identity is further evidenced by the fact that she regaled young Lucas with tales of mutant heroes who did the right thing, even when the rest of the world was against them, and Lucas often fell asleep imagining what these X-Men could have been like. Meanwhile, the Sheepshead Bay camp was one that was known for its inhumane experimentation. And so when Lucas was 5 years old and Shard was only around 2, the camp's prisoners were used to test a new initiative in which mutants were branded with an M over their right eye, a process that was done to the entire Bishop family, including the young children. In the midst of all of this, public opinion on mutant kind slowly began to shift as more humans started to speak out against the government's use of mutant internment camps. Meanwhile, Ruby Summers encountered Layla Miller, a time-displaced mutant originally from Earth-616, who encouraged Ruby to fight back against the anti-mutant regime. Things eventually reached a tipping point when the United States President announced a policy in which every citizen would be forced to undergo genetic testing to root out any remaining mutants. While many citizens protested this, Ruby Summers rose up to instigate a violent revolution, forming an alliance of mutants and human allies which came to be known as the Summers Rebellion. Of course, this uprising was far from bloodless, and as fighting broke out across the country, the Sheepshead Bay internment camp, where young Lucas Bishop lived with his family, erupted into chaos. Still just a child at the time, Lucas could do nothing but watch as both his parents were killed by Sentinels attempting to snuff out the rebellion. Separated from his sister and grandmother in the chaos, Lucas Bishop survived and eventually escaped to Manhattan. 7 years old at the time, he attempted to survive on the streets alone, but then he was found by an enigmatic Cajun mutant known simply as the Witness. Now, the Witness is one of those entities whose true nature is shrouded in mystery and contradiction. He often goes by the name LeBeau, and at first glance appears to be an older incarnation of the X-Man Gambit. However, this is apparently not actually the case. In truth, he's really some sort of trans-chronological being who is capable of appearing in various time periods and witnesses the events of every possible timeline, hence the name The Witness. For several years, Lucas Bishop lived on the road, traveling across a war-torn America with the enigmatic LeBeau, who taught him how to survive as a thief. During this time, LeBeau gave Bishop a less flattering perspective on the X-Men and even claimed that he was the last person to see the legendary mutant team alive, having witnessed their final battle. But then one day the witness simply disappeared, exiting Bishop's life as suddenly and unexpectedly as he had entered it. Meanwhile, the effects of the Summer's Rebellion were felt across the country and the political climate continued to shift. Many mutant camps were either destroyed or shut down, however, one remained in Las Vegas, Nevada, which became something of a safe haven for surviving mutants. Initially, there was a loose agreement between the Las Vegas camp and the federal government to leave each other alone, but in the face of increasing pressure from the public, government officials eventually allocated a modicum of funding that mutants could use to build schools and farms. Naturally, after the witness vanished, Lucas Bishop made his way to the Nevada camp, where he reunited with his grandmother and sister, who had also survived the massacre at Sheepshead Bay. For a time, life was relatively peaceful as Bishop and Shard were raised by their grandmother, who encouraged the two children to embrace Xavier's dream of coexistence. It was also during this time that Bishop met a friend of their grandmother named Hancock, whose mutant power allowed him to project fire from his eyes. A member of the Summer's Rebellion, Hancock was apparently aware of who Bishop's grandmother really was, hinting at a connection between her and the X-Men, but she prevented him from speaking further on the matter, claiming that her powers were gone and people generally believed that she was dead. In any event, Hancock ultimately returned to his squad to continue fighting, but overtaxed his powers during a subsequent battle, rendering himself blind. Now, another notable member of the rebellion we need to mention is a mutant named Trevor Fitzroy, who had the ability to absorb the life energy of others and use it to generate teleportation portals. Now, he was the illegitimate son of a man named Anthony Shaw, the Black King of the notorious Hellfire Club, where the wealthy and powerful quite literally floated above the chaos below. Presumably the product of an affair, Trevor was given the surname Fitzroy in reference to royal children that were born out of wedlock in centuries past, and was denied a position in the Hellfire Club for himself. And so instead, Fitzroy got involved with the Summers Rebellion and even grew close with Ruby Summers herself. During their time together, Trevor and Ruby got into a conflict involving an extremely elderly Victor Von Doom and a rogue duplicate of Madrox the Multiple Man who had been transformed into a cyborg known as Cortex. It was a somewhat complicated affair, the details of which we don't really have time to delve into, but the important thing for today is that during the conflict, Fitzroy was shot in the head and killed by Cortex. But here's the thing. The Summers Rebellion member Layla Miller had the power to bring dead creatures back to life, but was unable to return a person's soul to their body after they died. As such, she was generally unwilling to resurrect sentient beings, but Ruby Summers convinced her to forego the risks and revive Trevor. As a result, Trevor Fitzroy returned and proved instrumental in defeating Cortex, but was left completely devoid of morality. In any event, the Summers Rebellion did ultimately achieve its goal of overthrowing the Sentinel regime, and while that was indeed a victory for mutant rights, things didn't exactly get better overnight. While the details of exactly what happened are vague, it seems as though Summers herself either died or disappeared at some point during the conflict, and soon after achieving victory over the Sentinels, her human-mutant alliance began to fracture. A new regime came into power, and while mutants were now allowed to walk free, most of them had already been branded, making it difficult to live in a world where many humans still openly expressed anti-mutant prejudices. As a result, radical mutant groups began to emerge, such as the Exhumes, a terrorist group that was led by a former member of the Summers Rebellion and literal firebrand known as Damon. His exploits in particular brought other veterans from the Summer's Rebellion back together, and while they argued over how best to approach the situation, one in particular, a mutant woman named Hecate, who just so happened to be one of Hancock's former squad mates, asserted that mutants needed to police their own people, and that allowing humans to hunt them down was unacceptable. To this end, she and other rebellion veterans formed a mutant law enforcement organization called the Xavier Security Enforcers, or XSE, which of course was named in honor of Professor Xavier. They established an academy to train young mutants, started keeping detailed files on all known mutants in the area, and reclaimed the M mark as a badge of honor, tattooing the mark onto the face of officers who hadn't already been branded. At the same time, while mutant kind was indeed emancipated, the federal government also completely defunded any initiatives meant to help mutants and ultimately closed down any remaining camps, including the one in Las Vegas, where Bishop lived. In other words, mutants were freed, but they were also on their own. And Bishop's elderly grandmother, unable to survive on the streets, passed away, but not before making sure that Lucas promised to take care of his little sister. During this time, as young Lucas relied on his thievery skills to survive, he bought into the rhetoric that radical mutant groups like the Exhumes were patriotic heroes, and that the Xavier Security Enforcers were little more than a new breed of hound. Then, however, there was an incident in which an Exhume named Virago was fleeing from the XSE and attempted to take Shard as a hostage. Desperate to save his little sister, Lucas leapt on the mutant criminal, causing her to drop Shard. Enraged, Virago threw Lucas to the ground and intended on finishing him, but before she could, she was shot and killed by the XSE officer Sure Shot, and the whole experience caused Bishop to reevaluate his opinion of both groups. Sometime after that, Lucas and Shard were found by their old acquaintance, the mutant veteran Hancock, and the three began looking out for each other. And so while XSE continued cracking down on various mutant gangs and radical groups, an adolescent Bishop was determined to protect what little family he had left from the ongoing conflicts. He supported Shard and Hancock the only way he knew how, but the longer he did, the harder it became to stay under the radar, and eventually his actions earned him more notoriety than he wanted. This situation eventually came to a head when two mutant criminals, Billy Boy and Half-Track, were sent to put an end to Bishop's meddling in their business. Hancock, of course, tried to defend his young charges, but was killed in the ensuing conflict. The two criminals then turned their attention back to Lucas and Shard, but as they did, Bishop's anger and desperation to protect his sister swelled, and his mutant powers activated. Lucas Bishop, you see, had the ability to absorb various forms of energy and store it within his body to increase his strength and durability. Furthermore, he could release this stored energy in the form of concussive force blasts, and as it turns out, he had already unknowingly stored enough energy to unleash a powerful attack on the mutant criminals. Within a few minutes of doing so, however, XSE officers arrived on the scene and took everybody involved in the incident into custody. Not long afterwards, Xavier Security Enforcers began testing Bishop's abilities to see exactly what he was capable of. While he could absorb and redirect the blasts from energy weapons they fired at him, he wasn't able to completely absorb the kinetic energy from a regular bullet, and so he could still be injured. Impressed by his potential, the XSE gave Bishop an opportunity to join their ranks, and Bishop agreed on the condition that his sister be allowed to join as well. After that, both Lucas and Shard Bishop were enrolled in the XSE Training Academy and were even mentored by Hecate herself. However, it was also around this time that the soulless rebellion survivor, Trevor Fitzroy, was pressured by his father into joining the Xavier Security Enforcers. And so despite being older than the two siblings, he became a trainee in the XSE Academy alongside Bishop and Shard. About a year into their training, XSE officers Sure Shot and Trace took a group of cadets, including Shard and Bishop, on what was supposed to be a routine training patrol. However, this exercise proved just how dangerous the world had gotten when the class was attacked by a horde of creatures known as M-Plates, basically mutant vampires who survived by feeding on the bone marrow of other mutants through mouths on their hands. The M-Plates killed the officers leading the trip before turning their attention towards the cadets, but when one of them attacked Shard, it caused her mutant ability to manifest somewhat earlier than it otherwise would have. As is sometimes the case with mutant siblings, Shard's powers were similar but not identical to those of her brother, in that she could absorb ambient light energy, transform it into plasma energy, and then fire it as force blasts. Meanwhile, Bishop leapt into action and helped his classmates hold off the M-Plates until more XSE officers arrived to rescue them. It was only about a month later that Lucas Bishop was honored for his bravery and officially inducted into the XSE. He was given his badge of office, the symbol of the legendary X-Men, and officially became the youngest cadet to graduate from the Academy. He gained access to the XSE's files on all known mutants and kept track of one in particular, his old mentor, LeBeau, aka The Witness, who at some point resurfaced as the head of the Stark Fujikawa Corporation. Meanwhile, Shard was determined not to be outdone by her brother, ultimately graduating a year after he did, breaking his record as the youngest XSE officer. After that, Bishop and Shard both advanced quickly through the ranks and served on a unit called Omega Squad, alongside two other XSE officers, Malcolm and Randall. While Bishop preferred to stay in the field and ultimately became the leader of Omega Squad, Shard eventually surpassed him in rank and hoped to one day lead the entire XSE. During this time, she also sought to annoy her brother by getting close to their former classmate, Trevor Fitzroy, who was still in the academy at the time. The exact timeline of events is vague, but presumably Shard was an adult by the time this happened. In any event, while the relationship was never that serious and Shard did consider him a creep, she also believed that there was more to Trevor than he let on. And at one point he confided in her that he had no intention of ever graduating since his father had forced him to enroll in the academy in the first place. Not long after that, Fitzroy's half-brother William Shaw was mysteriously killed, and their father called Trevor back home, allowing him to leave the academy. Of course, Bishop and Shard suspected that Fitzroy was involved in his brother's death, and while they were never able to prove it, they did eventually arrest him for other crimes, namely using his powers to steal money and technology from humans. However, Fitzroy's father, Anthony Shaw, used his own connections and influence to prevent Trevor from being convicted, and Fitzroy ultimately walked free. Now, I will note that Fitzroy later claimed that Shard murdered his mother and that Bishop was there when she did, but the truth of this claim and the details of what actually happened are as of yet unrevealed. In any event, Fitzroy wound up delving even further into sadism and debauchery, forming a group of hellions that captured and tortured humans for their own amusement. Around this time, there was also an incident in which a renegade group of XSE officers formed their own rogue unit, Xavier's Underground Enforcers, or XUE, who attempted to recruit Shard into a scheme to alter the timeline and prevent their dark future from ever happening. Their plan involved capturing Trevor Fitzroy, as they had determined that his powers had the potential to open a portal to the past, but Shard disapproved of XUE's methods and refused to cooperate, ultimately leaving with the intention of bringing Fitzroy to justice her own way. While Fitzroy evidently escaped and evaded the XUE, he was eventually found and arrested by Bishop's Omega Squad once again. This time, however, he claimed that he wanted to make a deal, offering to reveal the location of the terrorist exhumes in exchange for leniency. Not wanting her brother to get all the glory, Shard decided to personally lead the mission investigating this lead, but quickly discovered that Fitzroy had betrayed them when the location he specified led them right into the heart of an M-plate nest. Taken by surprise, Shard was overwhelmed by her foes and infected, transforming her into an M-plate as well. Bishop was ultimately able to subdue and capture her, but her condition was incurable, and XSE policy was to exterminate any M-plates on sight. Desperate to save her, he took her to the Stark Fujikawa building and confronted the Witness, hoping the aged entity knew some way to help. Sure enough, LeBeau agreed to use the technology at his disposal to preserve Shard's mind, but only if Bishop left the XSE to work for him for a full year. Bishop reluctantly agreed, and Stark Fujikawa tech was used to extract Shard's brainwaves, killing her physical body while preserving her mind and transferring it into a holographic matrix, which the Witness held onto. After that, Bishop attempted to resign from the XSE, but Hecate was aware of his deal with the Witness and instead suspended him from all duties for 1 year. For the following 12 months, Bishop served the Witness alongside another former XSE cadet, Shirley Baylor, now known as Shackle, who had dropped out of the academy to work for Stark Fujikawa. While the details of these missions have not been documented, Bishop completed his term working for the Witness, after which he was given a uniprojector containing his sister's holographic matrix. Now, Stark Fujikawa did try to keep the master matrix they produced on their own servers, but Bishop destroyed their databanks before leaving, ensuring that nobody else would have access to his sister's mind. Bishop then rejoined the XSE, but Hecate noticed that he was colder and more distant than he was when he left. He returned to his role as the leader of Omega Squad and soon began hunting Trevor Fitzroy once again. You see, in Bishop's absence, Anthony Shaw had kept Trevor out of prison, but by this point Shaw had grown weary of covering for his sadistic son. And so this time, when Bishop caught Fitzroy yet again, the malicious mutant was sent to a maximum security prison known as the Pool. In the midst of all this, Bishop continued visiting the Witness in hopes of getting answers about what happened to the X-Men in their final days, and the enigmatic LeBeau's cryptic musings led Bishop to believe that there was a traitor on the team who caused their downfall. Meanwhile, in the Pool, Trevor Fitzroy encountered a mutant known as Bantam, whose powers allowed him to serve as a chronal anchor for Fitzroy's portals. In other words, by combining their abilities, Fitzroy could create portals not just through space, but time as well. Realizing this, Fitzroy escaped from his cell and instigated a massive prison riot, using the confusion as a cover while he and Bantam created a massive time portal to escape. Unwilling to let Fitzroy and the other inmates run free, Bishop leapt into action and pursued them through the portal, along with 2 other members of Omega Squad, Malcolm and Randall, fully aware that it might very well be a one-way trip. Arriving in the Marvel age of Earth-616, which from their point of view was about 80 years in the past, Bishop and his allies quickly began tracking down Fitzroy and his army of escaped convicts. Fitzroy, meanwhile, used his new time-jumping ability to gather resources and weapons, including an omnium mesh exoskeleton and a small legion of reprogrammed Sentinels. After arriving on Earth-616, Fitzroy met and allied himself with his decadent interdimensional relative, Shinobi Shaw. As fate would have it, Shinobi was also the illegitimate son of a black king of the Hellfire Club, in his case, Sebastian Shaw. However, Shinobi did what Fitzroy never could and seemingly killed his own father, inheriting his Hellfire Club membership. More importantly for today, Shinobi was a member of a hedonistic group called the Upstarts, who competed in a twisted game in which points were earned by killing mutants, with the winning players receiving resources and subservience from the others. Naturally, Trevor Fitzroy wanted to join the fun, and in his opening Gambit, sent his reprogrammed Sentinels after Hellfire Club members like Donald Pierce and Emma Frost. These Sentinel attacks, however, led to a confrontation between the X-Men and Fitzroy's forces, one that drew the attention of Bishop and his squad mates, who arrived and attempted to take Fitzroy down permanently. From there, things got a little chaotic as Fitzroy's minions were able to use image inducers to impersonate him, allowing the real Fitzroy to escape. Furthermore, Bishop was in disbelief at the presence of the legendary X-Men, and when they tried to stop him from killing his targets, he suspected that they were another of Fitzroy's tricks, leading to a confrontation between them. And before the confusion could be cleared up, the Upstarts set off explosive charges that forced both groups to escape. Separated from the X-Men, Bishop and his squad got back to hunting down the escaped convicts. Unfortunately, the trio of XSE officers were outnumbered and outgunned, and in a subsequent firefight both Malcolm and Randall were killed. The X-Men arrived in time to save Bishop, but he was still suspicious of them and attacked. In the ensuing conflict, Bishop was taken down by the steel-skinned X-Man Colossus, who inadvertently caused the future cop to fall onto a broken pipe, impaling him through the abdomen. Fortunately, they were able to get him back to the X-Mansion in time to give him medical attention and save his life. Once there, Bishop was approached by the X-Men's founder, Charles Xavier, the man after whom the XSE was named. Sending the others out of the room, Xavier spoke to Bishop alone, and the two came to an understanding, as Bishop realized that the X-Men really were who they claimed to be. Furthermore, Xavier offered Bishop a spot on the team, and Bishop, having no means of returning to his own time period, accepted. And that, true believers, is how Lucas Bishop, a mutant cop from 80 years in the future, came to join the legendary X-Men. Of course, in many ways, this is just where his story begins, but if you want to know what happens next, you'll just have to load up that Marvel Unlimited app and start reading some 90s X-Men comics. For Bishop's story specifically, you can jump into 1992's X-Men number 8 and Uncanny X-Men number 288, and go from there. In the meantime, that's all I've got for you this week, but thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you can get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!